Hi everybody, hope you're well. This video was requested by Kitty Cat, and this I'm going to be talking about team rules and sales. Now, whenever I'm talking about teams, I can mean unofficial breeding groups, unofficial groups and teams, and also VIP teams. So some teams will have specific rules, and those rules will be created within the team. Now, it is important that those rules don't break the rules of the game itself, but it's also important that they're there to create a nice structured environment that everybody in your team knows exactly what's expected of them and what's expected of the team as a whole. Because the team's rules should be there in fairness and not to in any way, cause harm to anybody. So whenever you're deciding on rules for a team, you want to decide on rules that work for you as a team, and you won't always get all the rules, you won't know what all the rules are whenever you maybe first start off your team, but you might start to get an idea once things happen, experiences you'll have, like for example, somebody might come in the team and might hog all of the blops, or maybe might hog all of the skillers. You'll say, no, there needs to be a rule for the team where everybody gets to share, for example. That's just an example, okay? You don't have to use it. It's just an example. You might have another rule where, people can't sell over a certain GP. And the reason you might decide this, I'm going to use an example for this. Let's just say, for example, I had a Dartmoor team. And our Dartmoor team had 2,000 GP right now. That's what level we were at. And we were competing against other Dartmoor teams, okay? What I would do if I was deciding on a GP to sell to the public, and when I say public, I mean people that are not in your team in any shape or form, so they're people who are outside of that. I want to think about what I'm going to sell. So I would go into the sales and I would search Dartmoors, and then I would sort about genetics and decide then what's the best GP to sell, because you've got to think about it in a couple of different ways. So I'll go through each of those. Now, when I say you got to think about it in a couple of ways, it's not because you have to adhere to this, but some of it I think is just kind of common courtesy. And I think fairer on everybody as a whole. So if you had 2,000 GP, that is your best Dartmoor in your team. And you thought, oh well, the other teams right now, there's 1,100 and something, there's 700, 600. We could sell higher and make loads of passes in Equus. You could literally flood sales with all these higher GP Dartmoors, but it's kind of unfair for two reasons. One, it's kind of unfair on the other teams because then it devalues their stock. And they're not really going to appreciate that. And it also kind of devalues your stock. If you have lower GP ones that you haven't sold off yet, you're actually lowering their price down further and further and further. And the other reason is, if you think about your team, you could put 2,000 GP horses in the sales or 1,999 GP in the sales. But there's another reason, and it's maybe not ideal. And this is because if you think about it this way, if the best horse that you have is 2,000 GP and you're competing against a bunch of other teams, and they see that you've got these horses in sales, they might go and buy those, or just other people who are not involved in Dartmoor breeding at all might buy those horses and then think, right, I'm going to go sell loads of covers or whatever. And you might go out for the day thinking everything's fine, don't bluff all day, come home, and then you see that this other team or this other individual has taken your 1,999 GP horse and bred to 2,200, right? Okay, this is me being overly dramatic, but I'm just trying to put this in perspective. And you suddenly have a 200 GP gap between them and you. So they've, got the better ones. So whenever you're thinking about this and pricing, not necessarily just in pricing, because you want to price fairly and reasonably and competitively against other people, because it keeps the market stable. If you dump a load of high GP horses into the sales, it devalues so much stock across the server, and people don't want to pay as much in future because they think, oh, I can get them cheaply, I'll not pay for them again for as much. So there are a couple of different reasons, because it's damaging to your competitors. It also damages your lower stock. It also, can affect the prices in the long term, because there are repercussions to that. So you will sometimes see that just for example, if the best horses on the server suddenly go into the sales for 500 GP, or sorry, not 500 GP, for 500 E, suddenly the prices of a lot of the other breeds will go down too, because people don't want to buy a 2000 GP horse when they can get a 4000 GP horse, just for example, for the same price or maybe less. So the other thing being that if you're selling, when you're deciding what gap to put in the sales, the reason it's important, if I decided to sell 1999 GP in the sales and my best was 2000, and I go out for the day, as I said, and come back and suddenly people who have bought my stock have bred higher than me, then I then have to stress, my team has to stress, and then we have to blop like mad to get ahead. And this is why I think setting a team sales thing, if you need it, is good, because then you can say, right guys, what are we as a team comfortable of blopping every week, or blopping every month, or blopping every day? And what is the best GP to put in the sales compared to our competitors, and also for us. So you might decide, you've looked at the sales and you've said, right, we have 2000 GP, we could quite contently sell at 1200 GP. It's a little above our competitors. We could price it a little bit more because it's a slightly higher GP, so people are more likely to pay for it. And then you've also got that gap. You've got 800 GP gap there, for example, where you feel like, okay guys, we're not going to have to panic too much. If we don't have to worry that somebody's going to buy our horse and suddenly be in front of us tomorrow or the week after or whatever. So it's kind of about finding a gap. If you're selling horses and you're agreeing within your team that you want a sales gap between what's your best horse in the team and what you want to sell, that there is a big enough gap that you feel comfortable to put those horses in sales and feel like you're not going to lose out. So, as I said, sometimes teams will put big gaps when they're not too sure. We might put 500 GP lower or 200 lower. Now, the amount is going to differ and it is going to vary massively. But I think really what you've got to think about is what suits you as a team. I'm not going to tell you exactly what a GP gap should be because it's very different for everybody. So those are some of the reasons why you might want to have rules around team sales. And the same thing for coverings as well. It's not just about sales, coverings as well. Selling really high GP coverings as well for very cheap can devalue a lot of stock as well. So, or even start selling quite high, and selling extremely high coverings is still kind of be damaging to not only other people but to your team. So, you can have a look at some other teams that are out there. What's their best? What are they selling? And you could get a rough idea of that. Look at a couple of teams. Don't just look at one and say, oh, they've got like a 500 GP cap, we'll go with that. Look at a couple and see, and then try it out for yourself. And it does take a little bit of practice. It's not perfect the first time you do it, but it's just to give a rough idea. So those are some of the reasons why pricing and so forth is important. Now, some teams have no rules about how much their members have to price horses for, and that's fair enough. I mean, really, realistically, now as I'm saying this, coming back from rules that teams themselves create, under horse rules, nobody can, under the horse's rules, okay? If I own a horse, whether it's a team horse or not, I could sell it to anybody I wanted. And technically, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you think about it for your team, if you had the 2000 GP horse and somebody offered you a pass for it, and you said, yeah, okay, you sold it, I'm guaranteeing you your team is not going to like you very long. Very long. So it's kind of like about finding the balance, is having everybody agree that this is the right way to go about this and everybody's happy with this. Now obviously sometimes you get people who will just sell whatever they want because that's what they want to do, and I'm not going to go into that, but it's just some things to bear in mind, I think, when you're setting up rules. And I think when you're setting up general rules in the team, just make sure that none of them break horse rules. Don't be telling your members to do stuff they shouldn't be doing. And make sure your rules are based around your sort of ethos of your team. So, you know, if you want your team to be enjoyable and fun, you don't really want anybody to come in and like be really nasty or anything like that. And obviously, don't, if somebody's being nasty, just report them because they shouldn't be. So there's just lots of things there that you kind of got to think about what your team is about, what you guys want to do, what your goals are, and eventually you will start to get ideas around rules and things like that, whether people that join have to have, you know, at least, maybe they have to buy at least 2 passes a week, for example, or because, you know, you will be using those or not, or they need to have at least, you know, own at least 500 horses, or have at least 100 agent points already in stock, things like that. They have to log on every day, or they have to be active for at least an hour per day, or they have to have so many days of seniority. Like, those might be some of the criteria for people coming in for your team. But also you might have a rule that if somebody hasn't logged in over, you know, maybe 60 days, that you remove them from the team because they're not there anymore. You know, if you need space, I mean, obviously maybe if they've just gone on holiday or they're not well or something, you might not want to kick them out. But just have rules around these general operating of your team, maybe how, you know, what kind of foals you pick for, you know, maybe you pick the highest GP, or maybe you pick for other traits. So it's just kind of like, think about all the different aspects of your team and what your team does, and then think, is there anything there that you need rules for? Now sometimes you will go along for weeks or months, maybe even years, and not need to have these rules because everybody thinks the same way and they work very well as a team. But you might have somebody come in who doesn't understand, or just doesn't work this way, or has worked a completely the opposite way to the way your team works. So you might need to say, right, this is how we work, so we need you to work like this also. Now sometimes if it's the way somebody blups, for example, maybe this is the way they prefer to blup, and the way you prefer to blup's different. There's certain things you don't need to dictate to people. You don't want, like, I think the other thing too is you need to decide whether you're a team that wants to be a democracy, or if it's kind of more like a dictatorship, or if it's kind of a little bit of both, or, you know, it doesn't have to necessarily be a dictatorship. But it depends on your team. So I know I'm rambling a bit, and I don't know if any of this made any sense whatsoever, but it's kind of hard to explain. That's the only way I'll put it. But it is kind of daunting, I think. I mean, don't just make a heap of rules for the sake of making a heap of rules. Do think about, you know, the rules that you're making and why those are important, or maybe they're not important, you know. So anyway, thank you to Kitty Cat for requesting the video, and I hope you have a lovely day. Bye guys!